So this week we're continuing our slightly masochistic romp through the signs of the zodiac and attributing plants to them. I say masochistic because this doesn't seem to get easier any week by week, and this is because for some signs, traditional authors bunged loads of like herbs, medicinal plants into those signs, and for others, less so, and it really stretches you sometimes to try and find what plant. Sometimes it's very obvious and sometimes it's not. And Pisces is, we have talked about Pisces before. We've got a video which I'll link, where we looked at the three winter signs of the zodiac: Capricorn, Aquarius and Pisces, and both Ollie and I named some medicinal plants in there which we would definitely put under Pisces. But of course, the more videos of this type we do, the harder it gets. So this time we're doing Pisces. So anyway, I'll start just by reading the traditional description of the sign Pisces, and then we'll take it from there. All right. So Pisces is the house of Jupiter, and the exaltation of Venus is in its 27th degree. It has three decans. The first decan belongs to Saturn, the second to Jupiter, the third to Mars. Its nature is cold and moist, watery, phlegmatic, and it is feminine, nocturnal, and bicorporeal, or two-bodied. It is in its last part in the equinox, and belonging to its last half are trees of moderate height. To it are beasts of prey and creatures of the water and stagnant waters, moderate in libido, having many children, cut in its limbs, without voice, cautious, master of stratagem. That's interesting. I didn't realize Pisces, as well as Jupiter, is a master of stratagem. So both the Jupiter signs are. Rash. So interestingly, master of stratagem, but rash, of many forms. To it, of the body of man are the feet. So that is the usual. That's from Abu Mashar's The Abbreviation of the Introduction to Astrology, 12th century astrological text. So, Ollie, what was your first plant?
Okay, well, the first plant I chose is the one I do have a second plant, but I'm happiest with my first one, partly because it is not a classical plant from Culpeper and his chums, and so it doesn't currently have any associations astrologically. My plant is tea tree, Melaleuca alternifolia, which I'm sure everyone's heard of, and you know, the essential oil. Oh, and It's funny. I was thinking, as Marcos mentioned, Pisces has been a really difficulty to find stuff that ties up with it. And then it suddenly struck me, and I remember that a friend of mine a few years back was telling me when she was in Australia, there's a place called Tea Tree Lake, which is a lake entirely surrounded by tea trees, and the lake is the color of tea, and you could swim in it, and it's basically a weak dilution of tea tree. So it's frightfully good for you, very antimicrobial and anti-inflammatory. So then I started looking further, and actually, I mean, this is new to me. Tea tree is a tree of, can be small size. Certainly the one in my garden is small size. I'm not quite sure how tall it gets. So that's a tick. And so I thought, actually, this is something that we could put. I think it's a Venus herb, definitely. It's a benefic. It's very pretty, and one of the all-round good guys. And I thought, well, maybe it could go in Pisces because of it's great attraction for water. It often grows in swamps, by rivers, by lakes, as I said. So that's all good. Um, and It's also pretty much the only, I think you'll be able to correct me on this, herb that Culpeper assigns to Pisces in his wonderful herbal is alder, which he says to use for things like, for basically anti-inflammatory stuff. I thought, well, that's interesting. To Pisces, he associates with Pisces. This is a similar sort of usage. And tea tree, it's antimicrobial and antifungal, so it's very strong against bacteria and funguses. Lots of people will, use the essential oil and funguses. I mean, it's one of the go-tos for Not sure it always works for toenail funguses and things like that. But certainly, if you're going to be a mix, it's a good thing to have there. And so that's another thing. Pisces rules the feet, and this is a herb that is often used on the feet not only the toenails but foot fungus, athlete's foot. So there's definitely a foot issue there. It's
Mm.
also Pisces is mutable water, so it's a very watery sign, sort of moving water, moving back and forwards, and this is it's I mean this is it always needs to be you usually if you're using it internally or swilling with it, I don't think it's best to swallow it, but you do it's a very strong remedy, so it needs to be diluted in many cases. If you're inhaling it, for instance, for sinus infections and things like that, or clearing mucus from the lungs, so you're often using it in a different forms. Water is mutable, different forms of water, um, and what else did I think was a nice so it's yeah, I mean like so many things, there's other areas you could put it to, but I like it for Venus particularly
Mm.
in Pisces, which is a watery sign. It's often used on the feet, and it's often used in various different dilutions and things.
I could give you a couple more that just
Oh,
thinking
go
about
on,
it
Marcos.
now, Ollie,
Yeah.
actually, I mean, this is, yeah, I like this, particularly your very evocative description of the trees growing by the lakes and then sort of like the leaves falling into it and stuff. But, obviously Pisces is a Jupiter and Venus strong sign, right? So, because
Yeah.
it's ruled by Jupiter traditionally, and Venus is in her exaltation in
Right.
Pisces. So the parts of the body it might also be expected to benefit potentially are the lungs, maybe the liver, because that's Jupiter,
Right.
and the throat, possibly breast and
Yes.
urinary tract. And, certainly you could see that people do use tea tree for as you say, respiratory conditions
Yes.
sometimes, and
Yeah.
upper respiratory tract infections as well. So maybe that's a Jupiter Venus positive thing as well. Bit of a push, but the only thing I could think that would sort of add to it. But I think it's a good one. I just wonder. I mean, because have you seen the plant growing? Because I haven't seen
I have
this.
a tiny tea tree. It's only 2 foot tall. I've moved it recently because I thought, what time was that tea tree I planted? And it was still the same size when I planted it. So I put it in the sunniest spot. Um, so I mean, it's literally only this tall. But it's
Right.
pretty nice, pretty. It's yeah, it's an attractive tree. It looks like at the moment it looks like it might be a strange sort of yew tree or another of those sort of Christmas tree
Yeah,
type.
because the description of Pisces, I was thinking about that. Trees of moderate height, cut in its limbs, and bicorporeal. Like the changeable. So I
Right.
don't know if any of those would apply to tea tree or not.
That's in
But
its limbs. I'm not sure what he means by that, but
well, that he's talking about the sign, obviously describing people who
no, no. But
potentially people who are maimed or something like that. But
oh, I see. Right. So it is quite. Yeah. No. Yeah. No. It'd be a push. It'd be a push. But I think a medium-sized tree we could go for definitely.
okay, well that's one. That's one of three. That ain't so bad. Okay, okay, that's good. And the bicorporeal I think is interesting because that to me with the mutable signs, mutable is probably a better word in terms of describing plant morphology. I often think the mutable plants that I might put in mutable signs have this sort of multi-branched or multi-flowered or a sort of poly look about them in that
It
they sort
certainly
of
has lots of branches. So it's one of those ones that comes out, and it's rather like a cypress that you get lots of branches,
right, right,
lots of
right, right.
branches coming out.
Yes. Yes, yes, yes. Okay, amazing. Really, I like that. Really good pick. Okay. I will jump straight into um my pick. Just gonna check we're recording, Ollie. I've just been struck with paranoia. 1 second. Um,
I think
can
we
you
are.
see if we're recording?
How do I see that? I clicked OK on the do you mind this recording button.
Okay,
So
okay, fine. Well, we are. That's fine. All right. I will Okay, so my pick is the totally unrecognizable plant to many, I'm sure. Cannabis sativa, otherwise known as hemp. Excuse me, I'm just using picture off a website and pop-ups are appearing. Um, I think this is an herb of Saturn in Pisces. And I think that because, well, firstly, Culpeper tells us that hemp that was not to be clear, not smoking cannabis, or that this is I do think smoking cannabis, cannabis sativa, the more psychoactive cannabis, I do think that is Saturn in Pisces. Hemp traditionally was a Saturn ruled plant, but hemp, Cannabis ruderalis, is not psychoactive. It does contain some CBD, but it's mainly used for fibers and like making cloth and stuff like that. Um, it has lots of other industrial uses as well, but the cannabis sativa and indeed cannabis indica, the ones with THC and sort of active psychoactive stuff, I would put into Pisces. And I would do that for, well, first let's explain the Saturn rulership. The Saturn rulership comes because it was considered to be a quote unquote narcotic. Obviously, that's technically wrong, but it does have something of it. It creates forgetfulness, it dulls pain. So it does have, that's a slightly Saturny thing in and of itself. It was used for skin conditions and joint conditions, which are Saturny things. It was used to make rope and fiber. And of course, one of the products of it is a dark resin. This is all very Saturny. Now, Pisces traditionally is a sign that was Jupiter and Venus strong, as I say. So this is like Saturn filtered through a watery Venus Jupiter sign. So it kind of, like, to me, the smell of cannabis is both pleasant and unpleasant at the same time. It's sort of heady and perfumed, but also a little bit rank as well, which I think is the Saturny element. It's kind of both. And it does have this faculty of like destroying, or not destroying, but breaking up short-term memory. It reduces short-term memory. And traditionally what it was used for, all sorts of different things, to say, like pain and joint problems, but what it was also used for things like OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, because it chopped up trains of thought and stopped people sort of following that train right through to the end. But that's the reason why it's also considered to be very, very bad for things like psychosis or anybody who's susceptible to schizophrenia, because it will make thoughts more associative and less connected. And that to me is Pisces as the detriment and fall of Mercury, the planet of logic. And it's also something to me about Pisces seems to suggest sort of floating things off on lots of separate little fantasies. In a way, it's kind of, it disperses things. And one of the things that cannabis reliably does is it will reduce a drive, it will reduce motivation. I mean, many people use it to enhance creativity, but I think it does that by sort of getting rid of anxiety. I just don't think it gets rid of it. It just sort of disperses it into lots of separate corners of your mind, so to speak. So, and also there's other things to say about it. It's grown hydroponically a lot of the time, which means literally grown in water. There's lots of different varieties. People sort of prize it for its sort of smell and all that. And of course, it's literally used to treat things like phantom limb pain. It's used for people who are literally cut in their limbs, people who are infirm. Pisces, I don't think in our little extract at the beginning of this episode, I don't think Abu Mashar said it, but Pisces was one of the signs traditionally associated with sickness or infirmity. And cannabis has a very long history as a medicine, sort of to not just treat pain, but also sort of reduce nausea and control spasms and things like that. So that the sort of cooling, suppressing, pain relieving, and slightly demotivating potentially aspect of its nature is described by its main planetary ruler, Saturn. But I think the secondary sort of like pleasure giving and the religious significance of it is all very much Pisces as the temple of Jupiter and Venus. to me. So that would be, I mean, any thoughts on that, Ollie?
Marcos, yeah. I mean, obviously, in modern astrology, Neptune is the co-ruler of Pisces, and would you say, and you know that is in many ways a planet of sort of mystery and dispersion, blah 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 blah. Would you factor that in, etc., or would you prefer to avoid the
Uh,
outer planets?
I wouldn't, because I don't believe Neptune rules anything.
I have no opinion, but I'm just
Yes, yes, yeah. I mean, what I mean by that is I do use if for those any astrologer who's triggered by me saying that, I do use Neptune and Pluto and Uranus and the modern planets when I'm doing astrological delineation, but I don't regard them as ruling any signs, because to me that sort of breaks up the harmony of the traditional rulership system, which I think is quite elegant. But yeah, I do accept. Yes, in terms of the symbolism, yeah, and I think the reason Neptune was assigned to Pisces was because there is some degree of overlap in that Pisces is, the fishes is a sign that's traditionally associated with perhaps a little bit of inward exploration, shall we say? So yeah.
Um, the other thing, I mean, I'm out on a limb here, but I do like the symbolism. You could say that an individual cannabis leaf, rather than the floret of them, looks a bit like a fish. It's definitely fish shaped.
Maybe. Yeah,
Um,
maybe. Yeah.
um, yeah. So
I don't know. I mean, again, this is a speculation that I've had for a few years, but just
I do
I, I,
like it
s- I
because
see it as a very Piscean plant.
and it's better than that, like because most people think of Saturn, and I don't have any problem with it being with Saturn, then immediately think Capricorn or Aquarius, which seem a very bad home for it. So Saturn in Pisces does seem a good spot for it.
Yeah, and also Saturn in Pisces is literally dissolving boundaries
Well, quite, yeah. So
because it's sort of it's relatively essentially weak in Pisces. So Saturn is peregrine in a lot of Pisces, which means it's wandering, and that's when anybody ingests psychoactive varieties of cannabis, that's sort of what your brain does. you know, it sort of wanders and it sort of dissolves those boundaries. But I don't think cannabis really so much takes away
I
pain or
thought of,
blocks it, but it disperses it.
and there's another thing that we could go. Obviously, the two major components of cannabis that people rattle on about are CBD and THC. So it's very two-bodied in the way people talk about it and use it.
Yes, and they swim in opposite directions, don't they?
Absolutely.
The
Yeah.
THC is up and the CBD is down in a sense, or relaxing, and the other one's sort of. But they're both complementary and
Yeah.
contribute to. Yeah, so I mean, obviously we could. It's very subjective, this, but I'm pretty happy with putting this plant in this sign. So anyway, we welcome your thoughts. So put any thoughts you've got below. All right, should we? What's your next pick, Ollie?
Okay, my next one is a controversial pick, which I am not very sure about myself, but
All
fortune favors the bold, etc., etc. So I've always noticed that dandelion, which Culpeper puts to Jupiter, is the leaves and the root are, though they're, you could say there's broad similarities, they're really quite distinctive remedies. And particularly as a herbalist, there are certain instances you'd say, oh yeah, that's a dandelion leaf issue, and you wouldn't necessarily swap out one with the other unless you'd actually run out.
Right.
So I thought, okay, so where would I put dandelion leaves? And this is partly Pisces rules the lymphatic system, as it's the main sort of because it's a watery system under its own mobility. And one of dandelion's great things is as a lymphatic clean cleanser to help clear toxins from the lymphatic system, and by just moving everything about. And I thought, well, that's a nice thing. And obviously, Jupiter's very happy in Pisces. Um, it's also a diuretic, which again is very watery based, and reduces the bloating and supports kidney function. I mean, we could obviously start getting into saying, oh, well, this is a Libran thing now, but it helps flushing excess fluids from the body. So really, I thought it's a more general sort of watery sort of sort of action.
No,
Um,
that all makes sense. Yeah.
and I think what was the other one was it's edible. And so it's like it's in Pisces, it's Jupiter. It makes it for a nice, you can make a nice salad out of them, etc. So that works for me as and and even it gets bile running. Again, it's covered by Jupiter. It's a Jupiterian herb, but it's all about flowing, getting things moving. Things are stopped, getting them started. It's very mutable water to me. So I thought, okay, let's go for it. Dandelion leaves, Jupiter in Pisces. Now, Marcus, I know you have issues with this.
I would say I wouldn't go as far as say I have issues with it. I think it's a very reasonable delineation actually. But I have always put this plant as a plant of Jupiter in Capricorn, um, just because of its use for the skin and the joints and increasing bile output, like a lot of medicinal plants do, to be fair. But also its status as the poster child for weed killers. You know what I mean? It's sort of like it's definitely, to my mind, it's one of the benefics. It's either Jupiter or Venus, and I think you could make an argument for either. I think we were talking before. Gadbury, one of the traditional medical astrologers, made an argument for Venus because he said, it uses the it affects the urinary tract, it's cooling. Most of the other traditional folks went for Jupiter, and I think that's more the character of the planet. It's not particularly big, but it's very, very prolific. It multiplies all over the shop. And it has this happy, sort of joyous little character to it. And it's really good for the liver, which, of course, is a Jupiter ruled part of the body. But I've always put it in Capricorn because of the bones, the joints, the skin effect, the gallbladder, and it's sort of, despite the fact that it's such a beautiful, friendly, joyous little plant, it has this literally poster child for weed killer adverts reputation, and it pops up out of concrete and stone and gritty stuff, and you try and kill this and it just pops up again, which seems to me a sort of very Capricorn feature. But to be fair, I'm not going to stake a limb on that. And for number one, and number two, I think you made a very, very good argument there for sort of putting it into a different category of sign.
Well,
Yeah.
I mean, and this is particularly the leaf as well, which obviously a lot of the weed killers do. I love your scrappy thing, but that's of course often the root that is there. You can kill the leaves, but the root is a Capricorn, it's
Persists.
earth,
Yeah.
and it stays. And so, in a way, you could say, um, you could say Pisces, double-bodied sign. It's like, oh yeah,
Yeah. I mean, again, I can see that for sure.
I'm looking at this picture. I think, oh goodness, the leaves, they look like a fishbone. Isn't that
Yeah, I
a
mean, it
cartoon
does. It does.
fishbone? It's something getting
Are
Tom
you
and
just
Jerry.
reminding me though? Another reason I put it on the Capricorn was, and this is circular logic, I admit, but the root is roasted to make coffee substitute, and I
Yes.
put coffee into Capricorn, and so
Yeah.
anyway,
Yeah.
whatever.
Well, bitter, blah blah. So anyway, there we have it.
But I think that's pretty persuasive, and it does have this lymphatic ability, as you
Yeah.
said, you say, Ollie. So, I mean, the thing is with the signs, folks, like the most important thing from a traditional prescribing of herbs when you're using them with this esoteric system of astrology is you need to get the planet that they're ruled by. So the planet and for prescribing in general, know what the plant does, what its physical actions are, and what it's doing, whether it's hot or cold or damp or dry, and what it's doing to the body. So we know all that with dandelion, but it's the sign is often tricky because assigning a sign is a more is and it's not, frankly, so important for prescribing. The value of it though is more the astrological exercise of doing it sort of stretches your astrology, so to speak.
Agree.
So
And it can bring out, it can bring out, all the antipathies of that sign. And
yes, yeah, you can bring in a lot of, once you've firmly established it in a sign, it can actually help you develop more potential uses for that plant. And if you get it right, you'll find that all of the thoughts that branch out as a result of you having placed it in a sign turn out to be useful. So that it's not a totally academic exercise. It does have some practical value, but it is much less important than getting the planetary ruler and just understanding the nature of the medicine itself, to be fair. Right, okay, so my last one, and this is also, as you know, Ollie, because we did talk about this briefly beforehand, is somewhat tendentious.
Yes.
And I'm going to see if I've got a picture here, which I should do. There we go. Hopefully.
Beautiful.
This is the Nymphaya alba, or white water lily. And it should be fairly obvious one reason why I put it in Pisces, because it's a water plant. So I thought, I could think of a couple more tall trees that I thought might be Pisces trees, but I couldn't really decide between them and Cancer, because they seem to, a lot of the symbolism seemed to fit with the sign Cancer as well. So I was like, okay. So I've gone for Nymphaya alba as a plant of the moon in Cancer. Culpeper says it's the moon, so I'm going with Nikki Culpeper on that one, which you can see it's a big white plant. It grows in water. It was the flowers can be used to make a tea or an infusion or a syrup that's very sedating. It's cooling, it's sedating, it helps sleep. It's a bit like wild lettuce, another sort of sedative herb, in that it was regarded as both cooling and moistening, but I think it moistened fewer body parts than wild lettuce was supposed to. So it's very cephalic. It was considered to be a cephalic remedy, and therefore sort of like affected the brain more, and therefore the flower is really good for insomnia. And I think the roots were supposed to be more, so the flowers were cool and moist. The roots were supposed to be cool and dry and to stop bleeding, and were used for sort of, and stop diarrhea and bleeding. So cold and binding, basically. And they've done some pharmacological experimentation into the plant, found it has some sort of anti-cancer abilities and stuff. So there's a couple of things here. One is the Pisces element water. Two, it's definitely got the double-bodied nature you were talking about with dandelion there, Ollie, where the root and the flowers and leaves were considered to be of both cooling, but the root's cold and binding, and the leaves and flowers are cool and moist, and the flowers particularly sedating. The other argument I'd make for it being put in Pisces is the fact that it was, like cannabis, a sacred medicine, a sacred drug, particularly in ancient Egypt. And they used both Nymphaya alba as well as other species like Nymphaya lotus, and the most famous one being Nymphaya cerulea, or the blue lotus. But they've all got very similar properties. They contain alkaloids like aporphine or apomorphine, which is not related to morphine. The only relation is that it's an alkaloid, but it's got slightly sedative and slightly euphoric properties. So the ancient Egyptians, I think, would use it in their incense. They would use it, I don't know if they had a sort of wax cones that they put on their head that would melt and run down. I think they used it in that, but they also put it in wine, like lotus flowers. They called them lotus, but truly this is water lily. It's not lotus, it's a different plant. But the so-called Egyptian lotus was in fact water lily flowers they put in wine that would have a sort of a really relaxing, slightly euphoric effect. And it was also thought to be somewhat beneficial for the liver. So a couple of things. Pisces is the temple of Jupiter and Venus here, sacred and also pleasurable, sacred and recreational. And that's sort of, so those are my reasons for it. There's nothing particularly that directs it towards the feet. It was I think that's a reasonable argument for this to be a herb of moon in Pisces.
Agreed. I'm convinced by that.
Okay, excellent. Oh well, that was easy. Good. All right.
Okay.
Fair. I can see that. The only things I could think that to push back on my own argument slightly, I guess, would be this is quite a showy plant. So I mean, Culpeper says it's a plant of the moon, and I can see that because it's white flowers and water and all that. Other species of water lily, the plants are so showy. I'm like, this is sun in a water sign, maybe, rather than rather than moon.
Mm.
And yeah, when I thought about the moon in Cancer, moon in Pisces rather, um, in the old Saunders system where you work out what body part that might represent. Obviously, the moon in general could be brain, so that's a yes. Stomach or bowel, so that's a yes. So happy with the moon rulership from that point of view, I guess. But moon in Pisces would be the ninth. Pisces is the ninth sign from Cancer, the moon's own sign, which would be equivalent to Sagittarius, which is the hips and pelvis. And it doesn't really have any action on there, but I don't know. I think Pisces fits well enough,
I
really.
think
But
so. Yeah.
okay, fantastic. All right. Well, we'll stop this one there. I think next month, we're on to Aries, which is considerably easier because there are several plants traditionally that were slotted into Aries. So, yes. Anyway, any parting thoughts, Ollie? Do you think from?
No, I was just thinking, I think it is useful, just looking at these things and where we would put the planets, which sign, because it's as you say, it really makes you think about things and the intricacies of astrology rather than just like, oh, what planet rules what.
Yes, yeah,
So
and if yeah, totally, and
as an exercise, it's always worth doing, and also, it really can help as well if when you're looking at the chart and you see, okay, the sixth house ruler is in Pisces. Suddenly, there's so much more coming into your head than just, oh, this is a list of things, because you've had to analyze it and use analogies and things. So it does enrich the whole process.
yes, yeah, I agree. I totally agree with that. I mean, and Culpeper even talks about it in his in his book where which we'll maybe read up on that next time with Aries, because he gives it almost like the logic of why you put a
Yes.
planet in sign, which we did talk about in our episode on space botany a little bit, which I will link again above for anyone who hasn't seen it. But there is, like putting a plant in a sign, like plant to a planet in a sign, does have a whole sort of logic to it that then helps with prescribing. But we'll go into that later.
Yes.
Again.
All
All right.
right. Well, see you next
Brilliant.
time.
Thanks, Ollie. Have a great week, everyone. If you've enjoyed this, please, do the subscribe, share it, do all the things, and we'll see you next time.
See you next time.